Maria Thompson lived a quiet, unassuming life in the small town of Willow Creek. She was the kind of person who blended into the background, rarely drawing attention to herself. Her days were filled with teaching piano to children, many of whom came from families that couldn't afford expensive lessons. Maria didn't mind. She found joy in watching her students grow, their clumsy fingers gradually learning to dance across the keys. Her apartment was modest, decorated with second-hand furniture and shelves lined with sheet music. It wasn't much, but it was enough for her. What most people didn't know about Maria was that she had a gift, a talent so extraordinary that it could stop time itself if given the chance. But she kept it hidden, locked away like an old treasure, chest gathering dust. Music had always been her escape, but it had also been a source of pain. Growing up, her parents pushed her relentlessly, demanding perfection at every turn. Every missed note was met with harsh criticism, every performance scrutinized under a microscope. After they passed away when she was just 19, Maria decided she'd had enough. She walked away from the spotlight, choosing instead to live a simple life where no one expected anything from her. One crisp autumn morning, as Maria sat sipping tea while grading her students' practice sheets, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope was thick and creamy, bearing an elegant script that read, "Victoria Thompson" in bold letters. Maria's heart sank the moment she saw it. Victoria, her older sister by 5 years, was everything Maria wasn't: bold, ambitious, and dripping with confidence. They hadn't spoken in years, not since a bitter argument over their parents' will left them estranged. Maria hesitated before opening the envelope, dreading what might be inside. The letter was brief and formal, written in Victoria's usual commanding tone. "You are cordially invited to attend the annual charity gala hosted by Victoria Thompson and Associates," it began. There was no warmth, no attempt at reconciliation, just a stern instruction to arrive at the specified date and time. Attached was a schedule of events, including a curious note: guest performances. Maria frowned. Why would Victoria invite her to such a high-profile event? And why now? Despite her reservations, Maria felt a pang of guilt. Perhaps this was Victoria's way of reaching out, however clumsily. Maybe it was time to bury the hatchet and reconnect. With a sigh, she marked the date on her calendar and set about preparing for the trip. She borrowed a dress from her neighbor, Mrs. Harper, who insisted it would make Maria look absolutely radiant. Though Maria doubted that, she thanked her kindly and packed the garment along with her toothbrush and a book to keep her company during the long train ride. When the day finally came, Maria stepped off the train and into the bustling city streets. Towering buildings loomed overhead, their glass facades reflecting the late afternoon sun. She hailed a cab to take her to the venue, clutching the invitation tightly in her hand. As the car pulled up to the grand estate, Maria's breath caught in her throat. The mansion was breathtaking, its marble columns and sweeping gardens making her feel even smaller than she already did. Guests mingled outside, dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, sipping champagne and laughing behind gloved hands. Maria entered the building feeling like a fish out of water. Her borrowed dress, though lovely, paled in comparison to the glittering outfits surrounding her. She spotted Victoria immediately, tall, poised, and radiating authority as she greeted her guests. When Victoria noticed Maria, her lips curled into a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maria," she said coolly, extending a manicured hand, "I'm glad you could make it." Before Maria could respond, Victoria turned to the group of women beside her. "This is my younger sister," she announced, her voice carrying just enough disdain to make Maria cringe. "She teaches piano to children in some tiny town. Nothing fancy, of course, but I suppose someone has to do it." The women chuckled. Politely, though their expressions made it clear they thought Maria was beneath them. As the evening wore on, Maria tried to stay out of sight, retreating to a quiet corner where she could observe without being noticed. But her reprieve was short-lived. During dessert, Victoria stood up and clinked her spoon against her glass to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth and commanding, "tonight we have a special treat. My dear sister Maria will grace us with a performance on the piano. Isn't that delightful? The room erupted into murmurs. Some guests exchanged amused glances, clearly expecting a disaster. Others leaned forward eagerly, ready to witness what they assumed would be an embarrassing display. Maria felt her stomach drop. She hadn't played in public since she was a teenager, and certainly not in front of an audience like this. This wasn't a gesture of goodwill, it was a setup, plain and simple. Victoria wanted to humiliate her, to prove once and for all that Maria was nothing more than a country bumpkin unworthy of her sophisticated world. As Maria rose from her seat, her legs felt like jelly. Every step toward the piano felt heavier than the last. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes boring into her, judging her every move. When she reached the instrument, she paused, staring at the polished wood as if it might offer some comfort. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid and rested them on the keys. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. What if she failed? What if she proved Victoria right? But then something shifted inside her. Beneath the fear and shame, there was a spark, a flicker of defiance. These people didn't know her. They didn't understand the hours she'd spent practicing as a child, the tears she'd shed over imperfect performances, or the love she still held for the music that had shaped her life. If she was going to play, she wouldn't do it for them or for Victoria. She would do it for herself. With that thought, Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The first notes were hesitant, almost fragile, but they carried a promise. And as she began to play, the room fell silent. As Maria sat at the piano, her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly, as if they weren't sure whether to obey her will or retreat altogether. She glanced up for a brief moment and saw Victoria standing near the edge of the crowd, arms crossed and lips curled into an expectant smirk. The other guests were either leaning forward with amused curiosity or whispering behind their hands, clearly anticipating some sort of disaster. Maria felt like a deer caught in headlights, frozen under the weight of their judgmental stares. But then something inside her stirred, a quiet voice that reminded her who she truly was. This wasn't just about playing the piano, it was about proving something to herself. For years, she had let fear dictate her life, hiding her talent, because she was afraid of being judged or failing to live up to expectations. Now, here she was cornered by her own sister's cruelty, with no way out except through the music. So instead of giving in to panic, Maria focused on the one thing that had always brought her comfort: the music itself. She closed her eyes again, blocking out the faces around her, and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys. The first note rang out, soft but clear, cutting through the murmurs in the room like a blade slicing through fog. It was hesitant, almost apologetic, as though even the piano wasn't sure what would come next. But then another note followed, and another, until a melody began to take shape. Maria chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a piece known for its emotional depth and technical complexity. It was a bold choice, especially given the circumstances, but something about the haunting beauty of the composition resonated with her in that moment. At first, the audience didn't know what to make of it. Some leaned back in their chairs, still smirking, while others exchanged skeptical glances. They were waiting for her to stumble, to hit a wrong note or lose her rhythm entirely. But Maria didn't falter. With each passing second, her confidence grew. Her fingers moved across the keys with increasing assurance, weaving together cascading runs and rich chords that filled the room like waves crashing against a shore. The initial hesitancy melted away, replaced by a sense of purpose that seemed to flow directly from her soul into the instrument. The transformation was subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. As Maria played, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence, forks paused halfway to open mouths, and heads turned toward the stage. Even those who had been most eager to see her fail found themselves drawn in by the sheer power of her performance. The music wasn't just sound, it was emotion made tangible, a living thing that wrapped itself around everyone present and refused to let go. Victoria, who had been standing confidently near the front of the crowd, suddenly looked uneasy. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her arms dropping to her sides as her smirk faded. For the first time in her life, she realized she might have underestimated her younger sister. Maria's playing wasn't merely competent, it was extraordinary. Each note carried layers of feeling, from sorrow to triumph, and it became clear to everyone in the room that this wasn't the work of an amateur. This was mastery, pure and unfiltered. As the piece progressed, Maria lost herself completely in the music. She forgot about the critical eyes watching her, the whispers that had preceded her performance, and even the cruel intentions behind Victoria's invitation. All that mattered was the connection between her hands, the piano, and the story she wanted to tell. Every crescendo was a declaration of defiance, every delicate trill a reminder of her resilience. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that she was finally allowing herself to shine, free from the shadows of self-doubt and fear. By the time she reached the climactic section of the prelude, the entire room was spellbound. People sat perfectly still, afraid that even the slightest movement might disrupt the magic unfolding before them. When Maria's hands finally landed on the final chord, the sound reverberated through the hall like a thunderclap, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt almost sacred. For a moment, no one dared to breathe, and then, as if waking from a trance, the audience erupted into applause. At first it was scattered, tentative, as if people couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. But soon, the clapping grew louder, more insistent, until the entire room was on its feet, cheering wildly. Strangers who had barely acknowledged Maria's existence moments earlier now rushed toward her, eager to shake her hand or offer words of praise. Women dabbed at their eyes with embroidered handkerchiefs, while men nodded approvingly, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine admiration. Maria, however, barely noticed any of it. She remained seated at the piano, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she tried to process what had just happened. Part of her wanted to run, to escape the sudden attention and retreat back into the safety of obscurity, but another part of her felt triumphant. For the first time in years, maybe even decades, she allowed herself to feel proud of her gift. She had faced her fears head-on, and in doing so, she had proven not only to the world, but also to herself, that she was capable of greatness. In the midst of the chaos, Maria's gaze drifted toward Victoria. Her sister stood apart from the crowd, her expression unreadable. There was no trace of the smug superiority she had worn earlier. Instead, there was something else, something softer, almost vulnerable. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and Maria saw a flicker of regret pass over Victoria's face. Whether it stemmed from guilt over her actions or awe at Maria's performance, Maria couldn't be sure. But whatever it was, it gave her hope. Maybe this night wouldn't just mark the end of her humiliation, it could also signal the beginning of healing. As the applause continued, Maria slowly rose from the bench, her legs shaky but steady. She managed a small smile, bowing slightly to acknowledge the ovation. Inside, she felt lighter than she had in years, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding her relationship with Victoria, navigating the newfound attention. But for now, she allowed herself to bask in the glow of victory. She had walked into the lion's den expecting to be torn apart, but instead, she had emerged victorious, armed with nothing but her courage and her music. The applause seemed endless, a tidal wave of sound that washed over Maria and left her feeling both exhilarated and overwhelmed. She stood there, still clutching the edge of the piano bench for support, as people continued to cheer. Some guests were whistling now, their enthusiasm breaking through the usual veneer of polished decorum that defined events like this. Others clapped so hard their hands turned red, while a few wiped away tears they couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just the music, it was the way Maria had transformed before their very eyes, turning humiliation into triumph with nothing but her talent and determination. Maria scanned the room, her gaze darting from face to face. She saw expressions she hadn't expected: awe, admiration, even envy. These were people who moments ago had dismissed her as insignificant, someone beneath their notice. Now, they looked at her as though she were a star that had suddenly appeared in their sky, dazzling and unmissable. A man in a tailored suit approached her first, his smile warm and genuine. "That was extraordinary," he said, extending his hand. "I've never heard anyone play like that. Where did you learn?" Maria hesitated, unsure how to respond. The truth was complicated. Her training had been a mix of childhood lessons forced upon her by demanding parents and years of solitary practice in quiet rooms where no one could hear her mistakes. But instead of delving into her past, she simply smiled and replied, "Music has always been my passion." It wasn't a lie, just an incomplete truth. The man nodded approvingly before stepping aside to let others take his place. One by one, guests came forward to congratulate her, each more effusive than the last. A woman in a shimmering gold gown gushed, "You must perform professionally, the world needs to hear you." Another man insisted he knew a producer who would jump at the chance to record her playing. Offers poured in from every direction: concert, invitations, recording contracts, interviews. But Maria shook her head politely, declining them all. This wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about proving something to herself. She didn't need the spotlight. She just wanted to keep teaching her students and living her quiet life. Amidst the flurry of attention, Victoria lingered near the edge of the crowd, watching silently. Her earlier smirk was long gone, replaced by an expression Maria couldn't quite decipher. Was it guilt, regret, or perhaps something else entirely? Whatever it was, it made Maria pause. For years, she had carried resentment toward her sister, blaming her for countless slights and insults. But tonight, seeing Victoria standing there looking almost human, Maria felt a flicker of compassion. Maybe her sister wasn't as invincible as she seemed. When the crowd finally began to thin, Maria found herself face to face with Victoria. The two women stared at each other for a long moment, neither speaking. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she admitted, her voice quieter than usual. There was no trace of mockery in her tone, only a strange vulnerability that caught Maria off guard. "Do what?" Maria asked cautiously, crossing her arms over her chest. She wasn't ready to forgive Victoria, not yet, but she was curious about what her sister might say next. "Play like that," Victoria replied, gesturing vaguely toward the piano. "I mean, I knew you played, but I didn't realize you were that good." Maria raised an eyebrow, skeptical of the compliment. "You invited me here thinking I'd embarrass myself," she pointed out bluntly. "Why else would you force me to play in front of your friends?" Victoria flinched visibly, her cheeks flushing with shame. "Okay, yes, maybe I thought it would be funny," she admitted reluctantly. "But I didn't expect this." She waved her hand toward the empty seats where the audience had been sitting, as if the memory of Maria's performance still hung in the air. "You blew everyone away, Maria, including me." For a moment, Maria didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to lash out, to confront Victoria about all the years of condescension and cruelty. But another part of her recognized that her sister was trying, however clumsily, to apologize. Instead of arguing, Maria decided to ask the question that had been lingering in her mind since the beginning of the evening. "Why, Victoria? Why go to such lengths to humiliate me?" Victoria sighed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. For the first time in years, she looked less like the confident socialite everyone admired and more like the older sister Maria remembered from childhood. I guess I was jealous," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You always had this natural talent, this gift that came so easily to you. And me? I worked so hard to get where I am, but it never felt like enough. Seeing you succeed, it reminded me of everything I'm not." Maria blinked, taken aback by the admission. She had spent so many years resenting Victoria for her arrogance and superiority that she had never stopped to consider her sister might have insecurities of her own. It didn't excuse Victoria's behavior, but it helped Maria understand it, and understanding was the first step toward forgiveness. "I didn't choose this life because I wanted to compete with you," Maria said softly. "I chose it because it makes me happy. Teaching kids, helping them discover their own love for music, that's my purpose. I don't care about being famous or rich or impressive. All I ever wanted was to be enough, for myself, and maybe someday, for you." Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes, surprising both of them. "You are enough, Maria," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "You always have been." The two sisters stood there in silence, the weight of years of misunderstanding slowly lifting between them. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There was still healing to be done, wounds that needed time to mend, but it was a start. As Maria looked at her sister, she realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about choosing to move forward together. When the gala ended and the guests began to leave, Maria found herself walking out of the mansion alongside Victoria. They didn't talk much on the ride back to the train station, but the silence between them was different now, less tense, more hopeful. As Maria boarded the train and settled into her seat, she glanced out the window and saw Victoria waving. "Goodbye." For the first time in years, Maria waved back, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The journey home gave Maria plenty of time to reflect on everything that had happened. She thought about the music, the applause, the offers she had turned down. But most of all, she thought about Victoria. Their relationship was far from fixed, but tonight had planted a seed, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. And as the train rattled along the tracks carrying her closer to home, Maria felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had faced her fears, reclaimed her confidence, and opened the door to a new chapter, not just in her career but in her family as well. The days following the gala passed in a blur for Maria. News of her breathtaking performance spread like wildfire, first through whispers among the elite attendees, and then beyond, carried by social media posts and local news outlets eager to latch onto a feel-good story. Headlines proclaimed her as the humble music teacher who stunned high society, and a hidden gem discovered at charity gala. Photos of Maria seated at the grand piano, her face glowing with concentration, went viral online. Strangers began leaving comments under these posts, sharing how moved they were by her story and urging her to pursue bigger opportunities. At first, Maria tried to ignore the attention. She returned to her quiet life in Willow Creek, resuming her routine of teaching young students and practicing late into the night when no one was around to hear. But it wasn't easy to go back to normalcy, not when reporters started calling her modest apartment, asking for interviews. Concert halls sent formal invitations offering her stages far grander than the one she'd played on that fateful evening. Record labels reached out, promising to make her a household name. Even Mrs. Harper, her neighbor, couldn't contain her excitement. "Maria, this is your chance," she exclaimed one afternoon while delivering a fresh batch of cookies. "You could be performing all over the world," but Maria shook her head firmly. "That's not why I play," she said simply. "I don't need fame or fortune. All I want is to teach my students and share my love for music with them." Still, some offers were too meaningful to decline entirely. A local community center invited her to perform at their annual arts festival, an event designed to celebrate creativity and support underserved schools. Maria agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to inspire others without straying too far from her roots. She also accepted a few speaking engagements at nearby colleges, where she shared her journey of overcoming fear and embracing vulnerability. Her talks resonated deeply with audiences, particularly young musicians who struggled with self-doubt. They saw themselves in her story, a reminder that talent alone wasn't enough. Courage mattered just as much. Meanwhile, Victoria made occasional appearances in Maria's life, though their relationship remained complicated. After the gala, she had sent Maria a handwritten note apologizing for her behavior and expressing pride in her sister's accomplishments. It was a small gesture, but it meant more to Maria than she let on. Over time, Victoria began attending some of Maria's performances, sitting quietly in the back rows and clapping enthusiastically during the applause. At first, Maria found it awkward. Her sister had never shown interest in her music before, but she eventually came to appreciate the effort Victoria was making. One evening, after a particularly moving recital at the community center, Victoria approached Maria backstage. "You were incredible tonight," she said, her tone sincere. "I'm so proud of you." Maria smiled faintly, still unsure how to fully trust this new, softer version of her sister. "Thank you," she replied, "but I have to ask, why now? Why are you suddenly interested in my music?" Victoria hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Because I realized something important that night at the gala," she admitted. "For years, I thought success meant being better than everyone else, smarter, richer, more accomplished. But watching you play, it made me see that real success isn't about comparison. It's about finding what makes you happy and pouring your heart into it. You've always had that, Maria. And I guess I envied you for it." Her confession hung in the air between them, raw and unfiltered. Maria studied her sister's face, searching for any trace of insincerity, but all she saw was honesty. For the first time, she understood that Victoria's cruelty hadn't stemmed from malice. It had been a defense mechanism, a way to mask her own insecurities. That realization softened Maria's heart, allowing her to extend forgiveness in a way she hadn't thought possible. "You don't have to envy me," Maria said gently. "We're different people, Victoria. You've built an incredible career, and I'm proud of everything you've achieved. But maybe we can stop competing with each other and start supporting one another instead." Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes, and she nodded. "I'd like that," she whispered. As weeks turned into months, Maria noticed subtle changes in her sister. Victoria started showing genuine interest in Maria's work, attending her lessons occasionally and even volunteering to help organize fundraising events for the community center. In return, Maria accompanied Victoria to a few networking dinners, lending her moral support despite feeling out of place among the glittering crowd. Their bond wasn't perfect. It would take time to heal years of hurt, but it was growing, stronger with each passing day. Maria also found herself reflecting on her own journey. The gala had forced her to confront fears she had buried for decades, the fear of judgment, of failure, of not being good enough. By stepping into the spotlight and playing with every ounce of passion she possessed, she had reclaimed a part of herself she thought she'd lost forever. Music, which had once been a source of pain, had become her greatest ally, a tool for healing, connection, and self-expression. Inspired by her experiences, Maria decided to expand her teaching efforts. She launched a program called Music for Everyone, aimed at providing free lessons to children from low-income families. Donations poured in from supporters touched by her story, enabling her to purchase additional instruments and hire assistants. Watching her students thrive brought Maria immense joy, reinforcing her belief that music had the power to change lives, including her own. Occasionally, memories of the gala would surface, bringing with them a mix of emotions. There were moments when Maria felt a flicker of anger toward Victoria for putting her in such a humiliating situation. But those feelings were quickly overshadowed by gratitude for the chance to rediscover her confidence, for the newfound connection with her sister, and for the reminder that sometimes our greatest victories come from facing our deepest fears. 1. Crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after the gala, Maria stood outside the community center preparing for another performance. As she adjusted the microphone and tested the sound system, she glanced out at the audience gathering in the courtyard. Among the familiar faces, she spotted Victoria, dressed casually for once, holding a bouquet of flowers. When their eyes met, Victoria gave her a thumbs up, and Maria grinned in response. As she took her place at the piano, Maria paused to soak in the moment. This time, there was no fear, no hesitation, only gratitude and love. She closed her eyes, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The melody soared through the air, wrapping itself around the listeners like a warm embrace. And as the I-wide final note faded into silence, Maria knew she had found her true purpose, not in accolades or applause, but in sharing her gift with the world, one note at a time. Months turned into years, and Maria's life continued to evolve in ways she could never have imagined. The ripple effects of that single night at the gala stretched far beyond her wildest dreams, touching not only her own path, but also the lives of countless others. Her Music for Everyone program flourished, growing from a small initiative into a thriving organization with branches in neighboring towns. Children who had never even seen a piano before were now learning scales, chords, and melodies under Maria's patient guidance. Parents whose budgets couldn't stretch to afford private lessons expressed their gratitude openly, often stopping by after classes to thank her personally. Maria's decision to focus on teaching rather than pursuing fame proved to be the right one, for her and for her students. She didn't need the glitz and glamour of concert halls or record deals. What she craved was the quiet satisfaction of watching young minds blossom through music. Every time a child mastered a difficult piece or performed confidently in front of an audience, Maria felt a surge of pride, not just for them, but for herself. These moments reminded her why she had chosen this life in the first place. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about connection, growth, and love. Victoria, too, underwent a transformation over those years. At first, her involvement in Maria's project seemed tentative. She attended performances and occasionally helped organize fundraisers. But as time went on, she became more deeply invested. It started when she volunteered to mentor some of the older kids in the program, offering advice on public speaking and confidence building. To everyone's surprise, Victoria discovered she had a knack for coaching. Her sharp tongue softened into constructive criticism, and her commanding presence inspired the children to push past their insecurities. One day, while helping a shy teenager prepare for a recital, Victoria shared a story about her own struggles with stage fright during college presentations. "I used to think I'd faint every time I stood up in front of people," she confessed, laughing softly. "But then I realized something. No one is judging you as harshly as you're judging yourself." Once I let go of that fear, everything changed. The teenager nodded thoughtfully, and later that evening delivered a performance that earned thunderous applause. Afterward, he ran up to Victoria and hugged her tightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you." Seeing how much joy mentoring brought her sister, Maria encouraged Victoria to take on a more active role in the program. Together, they expanded its scope, incorporating workshops on creativity, discipline, and teamwork. What began as a simple music lesson initiative grew into a holistic platform for personal development, empowering children to believe in themselves both inside and outside the classroom. The bond between the sisters deepened with each passing month, their shared mission creating a foundation of mutual respect and admiration. Despite these positive changes, tensions occasionally flared between them. Old habits die hard, and there were moments when Victoria reverted to her domineering ways, micromanaging details or dismissing Maria's ideas without fully considering them. But instead of letting resentment build, Maria learned to address these issues head-on. During one particularly heated argument over funding priorities, she calmly explained how Victoria's behavior reminded her of their childhood, a time when Victoria always got her way, leaving Maria feeling powerless. "I don't want us to go back to that," Maria said firmly, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "We've worked so hard to rebuild our relationship. Let's not undo all that progress because of old patterns." To Maria's relief, Victoria listened. She apologized sincerely, acknowledging that she still had work to do in breaking free from her controlling tendencies. From that point forward, they made a conscious effort to communicate openly, treating disagreements as opportunities to grow rather than sources of conflict. As the years passed, Maria's reputation continued to spread, though not in the way one might expect. While she avoided the spotlight herself, stories about her impact reached farther corners of the country. Journalists wrote profiles praising her dedication to arts education, and philanthropists donated generously to support her cause. One wealthy benefactor even offered to fund the construction of a state-of-the-art music center in Willow Creek, a dream Maria had dared not voice aloud. When the new facility opened its doors, Maria stood on the stage during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, overwhelmed by the turnout. Hundreds of people filled the auditorium, including many former students who had traveled from across the state to celebrate. Among them was Victoria, who stood proudly beside her sister, tears glistening in her eyes. As Maria addressed the crowd, thanking everyone for their support, she paused to acknowledge Victoria specifically. "My sister and I have had our differences over the years," Maria said, smiling warmly at Victoria. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that family isn't perfect. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes painful. But it's also beautiful. Without Victoria's help, and yes, even her challenges, I wouldn't be standing here today. So thank you, sis, for being part of this journey." The audience erupted into applause, and Victoria stepped forward to embrace Maria tightly. For the first time in decades, neither woman felt the need to hold back their emotions. They cried together, laughed together, and celebrated the unbreakable bond they had forged through trials and triumphs alike. Later that evening, as the festivities wound down, Maria found herself alone on the stage, staring out at the empty seats. The grand piano stood silent in the corner, waiting patiently for its next player. She walked over and sat down, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys. Though no one was there to hear, she began to play, a soft, melancholy tune that carried echoes of her past yet pointed toward a hopeful future. As the notes drifted through the air, Maria reflected on how far she had come. That night at the gala had been a turning point, forcing her to confront her fears and rediscover her passion. But it wasn't just about her. It was about the connections she had built along the way, with her students, her community, and most importantly, her sister. Each note she played told a story of resilience, forgiveness, and love. When the final chord faded into silence, Maria closed the lid of the piano and rose from the bench. She glanced around the room one last time, taking in the rows of chairs where so many lives had been touched. Then, with a contented smile, she turned off the lights and stepped out into the cool night air. Her journey was far from over, but for now she felt at peace. Music had guided her through darkness and led her to light, and as long as she kept playing, she knew she would continue to inspire others to find their own rhythm in life. Years had passed since the night Maria transformed a room full of skeptics into believers with her piano performance. The once quiet music teacher from Willow Creek now stood on stages far larger than she ever imagined, though not in the way most people expected. Instead of dazzling crowds in concert halls or recording albums for global fame, Maria chose to perform at places that mattered deeply to her: community centers, schools, and charity events. Her goal wasn't to amass fans, but to inspire others, to show them that even the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward and change lives. On this particular evening, Maria was preparing to play at a prestigious performing arts hall in the city. It wasn't her idea. The invitation had come months earlier from an organization dedicated to promoting arts education. At first, Maria hesitated. She didn't want to step away from her students for too long, nor did she feel entirely comfortable returning to the world of high-profile performances. But when she learned that proceeds from ticket sales would fund scholarships for underprivileged children, she couldn't say no. This was bigger than her. It was about giving back, just as so many had given to her over the years. As Maria adjusted her gown backstage, she glanced at herself in the mirror. Her reflection showed a woman who looked much the same as she always had, modest, unassuming. But there was something different in her eyes. Gone was the fear that used to haunt her every time she stepped onto a stage. In its place was a quiet confidence born not from perfection but from acceptance. She knew she wasn't flawless, and that was okay. What mattered was the message behind her music, the reminder that everyone has a gift worth sharing, if only they're brave enough to let it shine. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as Maria walked onto the stage. Spotlights illuminated her path, casting golden hues across the polished floor. The audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet before she'd even touched the piano. Smiling softly, Maria bowed her head in gratitude before taking her seat at the gleaming Steinway. She rested her hands on the keys, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Before beginning, she leaned forward slightly to address the crowd. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice warm and steady. "This isn't just a performance, it's a celebration of hope, resilience, and the power of art to transform lives. Music saved me during some of my darkest moments, and I've seen it do the same for countless others. Tonight I play not only for myself but for every person who has ever doubted their ability to make a difference." With those words, Maria launched into her first piece, a hauntingly beautiful rendition of Debussy's Clair de Lune. The melody flowed effortlessly from her fingertips, filling the hall with waves of sound that seemed to breathe life into the very air. As always, she poured her heart into each note, drawing from memories of her childhood struggles, her parents' relentless expectations, and the journey that had brought her here. The audience listened intently, captivated by the raw emotion in her playing. When the final chord faded into silence, the room remained still for several seconds, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then came the applause, a thunderous roar that echoed through the rafters. People cheered, whistled, and clapped until their hands turned red. Some wiped away tears, while others simply sat in awe, unwilling to forget what they had just witnessed. But Maria wasn't done yet. After acknowledging the applause with a humble nod, she segued into her second piece, a lively arrangement of Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag. The contrast between the two compositions was striking, one introspective and tender, the other playful and exuberant, but both showcased Maria's versatility and passion. By the time she reached the final notes, the audience was clapping along, laughing and swaying in their seats. For a brief moment, the grand hall felt less like a formal venue and more like a cozy gathering of friends united by joy. After the standing ovation subsided, Maria returned to the microphone to deliver one last message. "When I was young," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia, "I believed that music was something I had to master in order to earn love and approval. It wasn't until much later that I realized the truth. Music doesn't demand perfection. It asks only for honesty. When we play, sing, or create with our whole hearts, we give others permission to do the same." She paused, scanning the sea of faces before continuing. "Tonight, I want to dedicate this performance to anyone who feels invisible, unworthy, or afraid to take a chance. You don't have to be extraordinary to make an impact. Sometimes, all it takes is a single note, a single act of bravery, to remind the world that your voice matters." Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. When the lights dimmed and Maria left the stage, the energy in the room lingered long after she was gone. Strangers struck up conversations, sharing stories of their own struggles and triumphs. Children whispered excitedly to their parents, dreaming of the day they might learn to play the piano themselves. And somewhere in the crowd, Victoria sat quietly, her face glowing with pride. Later that night, as Maria packed up her belongings backstage, Victoria appeared at the doorway. "You were incredible," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "I mean it, Maria, that speech, it was perfect." Maria smiled, setting down her bag. "Do you remember when you told me success isn't about comparison, about finding what makes you happy and pouring your heart into it?" Victoria nodded. "Of course. Why?" "Because I finally understand what you meant," Maria replied. "This, right here, is what makes me happy. Not the applause, not the recognition, but knowing that I'm helping others find their own light. And honestly, I think I owe part of that realization to you." Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. "You don't owe me anything," she said firmly. If anything, I owe you for forgiving me, for letting me be part of your journey, and for showing me what true strength looks like." The sisters embraced tightly, neither needing to say more. Their relationship had weathered storms, misunderstandings, and years of separation, but it had emerged stronger than ever. They weren't perfect. They argued occasionally, disagreed on trivial matters, but they had learned to navigate their differences with patience and love. In the weeks that followed, Maria resumed her routine in Willow Creek, teaching her students and organizing programs for underserved communities. The funds raised from her performance allowed her to expand her reach even further, providing instruments and resources to schools that desperately needed them. Meanwhile, Victoria continued to support her sister's efforts, using her connections to secure additional funding and sponsorships. Together, they proved that collaboration could achieve far more than competition. Maria often thought about the gala, the night that had started it all, and how different things might have been if Victoria hadn't pushed her into the spotlight. Would she still have rediscovered her confidence? Would she have found the courage to share her gift with the world? Perhaps not. In hindsight, she realized that sometimes growth comes from the most unexpected places, even from pain and humiliation. One crisp autumn morning, as Maria prepared for another day of teaching, she paused to glance out her window. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A group of children ran past her house, laughing and chasing leaves swirling in the breeze. Watching them, Maria felt a profound sense of gratitude for her family, her students, and the music that had carried her through life's ups and downs. She turned back to her piano, seated herself, and began to play. The melody was simple, almost childlike, yet infused with warmth and hope. Outside, the laughter of the children mingled with the sound of her music, creating a harmony that felt timeless and universal. Maria smiled as she played, knowing that her journey wasn't defined by any single moment. Not the gala, not the accolades, not even the bond she had rebuilt with her sister. It was defined by the choices she made every day, to embrace vulnerability, to nurture others, and to honor the beauty of imperfection. And as long as she kept playing, with her heart wide open, she knew she would continue to inspire those around her, one note at a time.